The camera opens on a suburban street. Quiet, ordinary, picture perfect. But then, the sound of drilling shatters the silence. A brand new fence cuts across a manicured lawn. Except this fence doesn't belong to the man building it. It belongs to his neighbor. The board rattles as nails sink deep, each strike more defiant than the last. And then the camera pans to a deed, stamped, sealed, legally binding. This was not just a fence. It was a declaration of war. The neighbor smirks as if nothing can touch him. But what he doesn't know is that every plank he hammers into the ground is on someone else's property. Someone watching. Someone planning. The voice lowers, sharper now. He thought he was stealing a few inches of land. He didn't realize he was giving away his entire living room, because when the dust settled and the legal lines were drawn, that fence didn't move backward. No, it moved forward, straight into his house. And that's when the neighborhood learned the truth. Property battles don't just break families. They break entire communities, but this was just the beginning. At first glance, Maplewood Estates looked like the kind of neighborhood realtors bragged about in glossy brochures. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, the kind of place where families waved to each other during evening walks, and holiday lights gleamed in perfect symmetry. But underneath the surface, order came at a price. The HOA controlled everything. From the shade of green, you could paint your shutters to the exact number of garden gnomes allowed in your yard. They fined late payments, inspected trash bins, and handed out violation letters like Halloween candy. And at the center of it all was a board, a handful of neighbors who thrived on power. The kind who turned petty complaints into legal weapons. One of them was Gerald Whitman, the man behind the fence. Retired, stubborn, and convinced the world owed him respect. He had lived in Maplewood for nearly 2 decades, and in his mind, that gave him seniority over everyone else. He thinks the bylaws are just suggestions for other people, whispered one neighbor. Gerald had already collected fines for noisy construction, unapproved paint colors, and even parking his boat too close to the curb. But instead of backing down, he treated each warning like a challenge. And then came his latest stunt, the fence. It didn't look suspicious at first. A few wooden posts, a stretched line of string, the sound of saws buzzing on a Saturday morning. But when neighbors noticed the fence line didn't match the original property markers, rumors began to swirl. Some said Gerald was trying to gain a few extra feet for his garden. Others whispered he was quietly pushing into land that didn't belong to him. The HOA didn't intervene. Why would they? Gerald was one of their own, a board member, protected, shielded. That's when Michael Anderson, the quiet neighbor next door, decided to dig deeper. Michael wasn't flashy. He kept to himself, paid his dues, trimmed his hedges like clockwork. But what the HOA didn't know was that Michael also had a background in land surveying. He understood property lines better than most lawyers. One night, with only a flashlight and a folder of documents, Michael walked the edge of his lawn. He measured the distance between stakes buried years ago when the neighborhood was first built. His calculations didn't lie. The new fence wasn't just a few inches off. It was almost 4 feet over the line, 4 feet. In a world of rigid property rights, that was massive. Michael stayed quiet at first, documenting everything. He gathered copies of the deed, old surveys, even pulled up digital county maps. The evidence stacked higher than Gerald's fence posts. Still, he hesitated. Going against the HOA board wasn't just risky, it was dangerous. Neighbors who challenged them often found their lives turned upside down. Surprise inspections, fines for minor weeds, mysterious complaints piling up, but Michael had something the others didn't. He wasn't just defending his yard. He was protecting land that legally stretched farther than anyone realized. Land Gerald had no idea he was building on. The tension grew slowly, like storm clouds before lightning. Neighbors pretended not to notice, but whispers spread at block parties and mailboxes. Did you see how far that fence is from the sidewalk? Someone's going to get sued. Michael won't let this slide. Not him. And then came the HOA meeting, the one that changed everything. Gerald sat at the head of the long oak table, gavel in hand, lecturing about community standards while his fence posts were still drying in the sun. The arrogance was almost theatrical. Michael raised his hand. Calm, steady. His voice didn't shake as he spoke. There's a problem with your fence, Gerald. It's not on your land. The room went silent. Gerald smirked, leaning back in his chair. I've been here longer than you, son. I know where my land begins and ends. Michael slid a folded piece of paper across the table. The deed, the survey, proof. And in that moment, something shifted. The board glanced at the documents, then back at Gerald. Doubt flickered, but only for a second. They closed ranks, brushing off Michael's claim as a misunderstanding that could be resolved later. Later never came. Instead, Gerald doubled down. He finished the fence, painted it, even installed a lock on the gate. Each action a taunt, daring Michael to fight back. The calm before the storm was over. The battle for Maplewood Estates had begun, because what Gerald didn't realize was that Michael's property rights didn't end at the fence line. They extended deep, far enough that when he finally revealed the truth, Gerald's fence wouldn't just trespass on a yard. It would trespass straight into his own living room. And that was a fight no HOA could cover up. The fence should have been a simple dispute. A tape measure, a few signatures, a compromise. But in Maplewood Estates, nothing was ever simple. The morning after the HOA meeting, Michael found a bright yellow notice taped to his mailbox. A violation? According to the board, his grass measured 1 inch above regulation height. The letter was signed by Gerald himself. Neighbors whispered as Michael tore it down. Everyone knew what was happening. The HOA was circling the wagons, protecting their own, but Michael didn't flinch. He knew this was only their first shot. Within weeks, the violations multiplied. His trash cans weren't properly concealed. His shutters needed repainting. Even the length of his driveway was called into question. It was harassment, plain and simple. A campaign designed to break him down before he could fight back. Yet Michael wasn't the kind of man to bow to pressure. He stayed quiet, methodical. He paid every fine on time, keeping receipts in a thick folder. He documented everything: dates, photos, letters. Each violation became another piece of ammunition. And while the board thought they were pushing him into a corner, Michael was already building his counterattack. The cracks in Gerald's story started to show when Michael pulled county property records. Buried inside dusty archives was a survey map from the early 1990s, back when Maplewood was still farmland. The boundaries were drawn differently than today's plats, and here was the shocking part. Gerald's property line wasn't just close to Michael's, it actually overlapped, with land the HOA claimed as common space. Meaning, Gerald's living room, the very heart of his house, technically, sat on ground he didn't own. Michael stared at the documents in disbelief. If true, this wasn't just a fence dispute. This was a hidden deed conspiracy. But secrets like this never stay quiet for long. Word spread after Michael confided in a neighbor, Sarah. She was one of the few brave enough to stand up to the board, and she knew exactly how to make noise. By the next HOA meeting, whispers had turned into accusations. I heard Gerald's house isn't even on his land. They say the HOA has been covering it up for years. What else are they hiding from us? The board tried to regain control, gavel pounding, voices raised. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Gerald lashed out, red-faced and trembling. Michael is lying. He's desperate. He wants to destroy this neighborhood. But Michael didn't need to shout. He had proof. One by one, he laid out the surveys, the deeds, the county maps. He spoke calmly, like a teacher explaining a simple equation. This isn't about a fence, he said. This is about ownership. And the truth is written right here. The room went silent. Even the board couldn't ignore it anymore. If Gerald's house really sat partly on land he didn't own, then the HOA had bigger problems than tall grass. It meant their president, their enforcer, was vulnerable, and in neighborhoods like Maplewood, vulnerability meant blood in the water. The retaliation grew desperate. Gerald accused Michael of harassment. Anonymous complaints were filed with the city about Michael's unsafe property. At one point, someone even dumped a pile of trash on his lawn in the middle of the night, but instead of breaking, Michael used it. Every incident was another log on the fire. Meanwhile, Sarah began leaking pieces of the story to local reporters. A headline appeared in the Sunday paper. Fence war exposes HOA secrets. Neighbors who once feared the board now began choosing sides. Some rallied behind Michael, seeing him as the underdog fighting corruption. Others clung to Gerald, terrified that exposing the truth would tank their property values. The neighborhood was divided, and the battle lines were drawn. Then came the turning point. Michael requested a full title search on both properties. The results were devastating. Not only did Gerald's fence trespass for feet into Michael's yard, but his entire living room and back patio were technically built on someone else's parcel the HOA had known for years. They buried the mistake to avoid lawsuits, hoping no one would ever look closely enough to uncover it. But Michael did. And now he held the smoking gun. This changes everything, whispered Sarah when she saw the documents. It wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was fraud, negligence, a ticking time bomb that could unravel the entire HOA's authority. Michael had leverage now, real power, enough to turn the board's own weapons against them. But Gerald wasn't finished. The more desperate he became, the more reckless his moves. He called emergency meetings, tried to rally allies, even threatened to sue Michael personally for defamation. He thinks he's in control, Michael said quietly one night. He's not, because while Gerald was fighting in the open, Michael was planning something far more devastating. Something that would not only take back his land, but leave Gerald with nothing. The fence war had escalated into a full-blown neighborhood uprising. And what happened next shocked the entire community, because the truth was about to come out. And when it did, Maplewood Estates would never be the same again. It happened on a Thursday morning. Cloudy skies, cool air, the kind of day that usually passed without notice. But that morning, Michael opened an envelope that would change everything. Inside was the final title search, stamped by the county recorder's office. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust, like they hadn't been touched in years. Michael spread the documents across his dining table. His eyes moved over every line, every surveyor's note, every boundary description. And then he saw it. The discovery wasn't just about the fence. It was bigger, much bigger. Gerald didn't legally own all the land his house sat on. Nearly 1/3 of his home, the living room, the patio, even part of his garage, crossed into a parcel that technically belonged to someone else, and that someone else was Michael. Michael leaned back in his chair, stunned. He had expected minor encroachment, a few feet, maybe a corner of the fence, but this meant Gerald's home was trespassing directly onto Michael's deeded property. It wasn't just a boundary issue. It was a legal catastrophe. In real estate law, ownership is everything. You can lose a house to foreclosure, but you cannot live on land you do not own. If the land belongs to Michael, then Gerald's home, his pride, his fortress, his weapon, was built on borrowed ground. And the HOA had known. Buried in the records was a note from the late 1990s. A developer had misdrawn the lot lines during construction. Instead of correcting it, the HOA quietly filed a variance request, hoping no one would notice. The county never approved it. The error sat unresolved for decades. Until now, Michael closed the folder slowly. For months, he had been playing defense. Now, he had the bombshell that could flip the entire neighborhood upside down. But secrets like this never stay buried quietly. Sarah was the first person Michael showed. Her hand shook as she traced the highlighted lines on the map. "This isn't just leverage," she whispered. "This is a nuclear weapon." They both knew what it meant. With one legal motion, Michael could claim the land beneath Gerald's home. He could force Gerald to pay rent. He could even, in the most extreme case, push for demolition. The fence was no longer the story. The story was ownership. And in Maplewood Estates, ownership meant power. The next HOA meeting was chaos before it even began. The community center parking lot overflowed with cars. Neighbors argued on the sidewalk, voices sharp, fingers pointing. By the time everyone packed into the fluorescent-lit room, the tension was so thick you could feel it in the air. Gerald sat at the head of the table, sweating but defiant. He banged his gavel, demanding order. But the murmurs didn't stop. Michael rose slowly, a folder in his hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of the documents spoke for him. "I have proof," he said, laying the papers down. "Not just of the fence, but of the land under your house." The board member stiffened. Gerald's face flushed crimson. "You're lying." Gerald spat. "You're making this up." Michael opened the survey, sliding it across the table for everyone to see. "This is from the county, stamped, verified. Your house sits on my property." And the HOA covered it up. Gasps echoed through the room. One neighbor whispered, "Oh my God." Another muttered, "This can't be real." The board scrambled, flipping through the pages. But the seal was undeniable. The truth stared back at them in black ink. For the first time, Gerald had no words. His smirk was gone. His gavel hand trembled. And that's when Michael delivered the final blow. "I'm not asking you to move your fence. I'm asking how it feels to live in a house that isn't even yours." The room erupted. Shouts, accusations, neighbors pounding the tables, demanding answers. The HOA tried to quiet them, but the damage was done. The story spread like wildfire. Within days, a local news crew parked outside Maplewood Estates. Headlines screamed across social media. "Homeowner discovers neighbor's house built on his land." The HOA's carefully controlled image shattered overnight. Some neighbors turned on Gerald instantly. "He lied to us." One woman shouted. Others clung to denial, terrified of what this meant for their property values. The once pristine neighborhood was now infamous, its reputation destroyed by a secret buried for 30 years. Behind the scenes, Michael met with an attorney. The lawyer's words were chilling. "You own the land. That gives you rights. More rights than the man who built the house on it." Michael had leverage no one could deny. He could charge Gerald rent. He could file for an injunction. He could take Gerald to court and bleed him dry in legal fees. But Michael didn't rush. Revenge wasn't just about winning. It was about timing. He let Gerald stew in panic. Let the HOA scramble to hold emergency meetings. Let the neighbors argue in whispers at the mailbox. Every day that passed, Gerald lost more control. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, another secret surfaced. A former board member, bitter and ready to talk, reached out to Michael. He handed over a thumb drive filled with emails, correspondence between board members spanning years. In those emails were references to the Whitman variance problem, proof that the HOA had deliberately concealed the ownership issue to protect Gerald. Proof they had lied, not just to Michael, but to every homeowner in Maplewood Estates. "This isn't negligence anymore," Michael said quietly. "This is corruption." Sarah leaned forward. "And now you can expose them all." The stage was set. Michael had the deeds. He had the surveys. He had the smoking gun emails. Gerald had only his arrogance and a house built on stolen land. The power dynamic had flipped, and as Maplewood Estates braced for the fallout, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was about to become a war. Revenge doesn't come in a single strike. It comes in careful moves, stacked one after another, until the enemy collapses under the weight of their own mistakes. Michael understood this better than anyone. For months, he had been the quiet target, fined, harassed, humiliated. But now the power shifted. The land beneath Gerald's home belonged to him. The HOAS cover-up was documented, and Michael held all the cards. The plan began with silence. Michael didn't rush to court. He didn't storm Gerald's door with threats. Instead, he let the rumor mill do the work. Neighbors whispered about eviction notices. Some claimed Gerald's home would be condemned. Others swore Michael was planning to bulldoze it. The uncertainty spread faster than fact. And in that silence, fear grew. Gerald's once commanding presence withered. His voice at meetings carried less weight. Every time he shouted, someone muttered, "Why's he so loud when he doesn't even own his living room?" Step one was complete. Weaken the enemy's credibility. Next came the paper trail. Michael's attorney drafted a letter. Not a lawsuit, not yet, but a formal notice of encroachment. Polite, professional, devastatingly clear. It stated that Gerald's house sat on Michael's land, and that rent would now be required for continued use of the property. The number wasn't outrageous. It was fair, even modest. But to Gerald, it was humiliation. Paying rent to the man he'd tried to destroy. Unthinkable. He refused, of course. And in that refusal, he fell into Michael's trap, because now Michael had legal grounds for escalation. While Gerald fumed, Michael moved on to step 3. Exposure. Sarah leaked more of the emails, not to the press this time, but to the homeowners themselves. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, screenshots of the board's secret conversations. Phrases like "ignore the variance issue" and "keep this quiet at all costs." The neighborhood was outraged. Residents who once trusted the HOA now questioned every rule, every fine, every decision. At the next meeting, chaos erupted. Neighbors shouted at the board, demanding resignations. One man slammed his fist on the table. "You've been lying to us for years." Gerald tried to restore order, gavel shaking, but no one listened. He had lost the room. Step 4, isolation. Michael didn't attack Gerald directly. He attacked the foundation of his power, the HOA itself. One by one, board members resigned under pressure. The treasurer quit first, then the secretary. Soon, only Gerald remained, clinging to a title that no longer held weight. By then, Michael had already filed his lawsuit. A clean, precise motion claiming legal ownership of the land beneath Gerald's home and demanding resolution. The news spread like wildfire. A local station aired the headline, "Homeowner sues neighbor, claims ownership of house land." The story went viral, sparking debates online about property rights and HOA corruption. Suddenly, Maplewood Estates wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a battleground on national display, and Gerald was the villain. But Michael's plan didn't stop there. Step 5 was psychological. Every day, Michael drove past Gerald's house slowly, calmly, reminding him without words, "I own this ground." Neighbors began avoiding Gerald altogether. Invitations dried up. His morning walks were met with cold stares. He had become a pariah in his own kingdom. The pressure broke him. Late at night, Gerald was seen pacing his yard, muttering to himself, staring at the fence like it had betrayed him. And then came the final strike. Court day. The room was packed. Neighbors filling the benches, reporters lining the walls. Gerald sat with his lawyer, pale and sweating. Michael walked in steady, calm, a folder under his arm. The judge reviewed the documents, the deeds, the surveys, the variance requests that had never been approved, the emails showing the cover up. The decision was swift. Michael owned the land. Gerald's home was trespassing. The HOA had knowingly concealed the truth. The gavel fell. And with it, Gerald's world collapsed. The court ordered him to either negotiate rent with Michael or face the possibility of losing part of his home. The HOA, stripped of credibility, was forced into dissolution. Neighbors erupted in cheers outside the courthouse. Some hugged Michael, thanking him for exposing the corruption. Others shook their heads in disbelief, whispering, "I can't believe this actually happened." And as for Gerald, he walked out silent, shoulders slumped, his empire reduced to rubble. For the first time, he looked small. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Revenge wasn't about shouting in victory. It was about watching the enemy crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. And that's exactly what happened. The fence still stood, but its meaning had changed. No longer a symbol of defiance, it was now a reminder, a monument to Gerald's downfall. Michael had turned humiliation into triumph, and as he watched the sunset over Maplewood Estates that evening, one thought lingered in his mind. This wasn't the end, because in neighborhoods like Maplewood, secrets always run deeper than you think, and the next one was already waiting to be revealed. The courtroom should have been the end. The ruling was clear. Michael owned the land, Gerald's house sat illegally upon it, and the HOA had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. But for Gerald, defeat was unthinkable. He wasn't just losing a case. He was losing his identity. For decades, he had been the enforcer, the rule maker, the king of Maplewood Estates. To watch that power slip through his fingers drove him to desperation. And desperate men make dangerous moves. The showdown began with an announcement. Gerald called for one last HOA meeting. No board, no authority, but his pride demanded a stage. Flyers were slipped into mailboxes. Handwritten notes shoved under doors. Final meeting. The truth will be revealed. Neighbors rolled their eyes, but curiosity got the better of them. On a warm evening, they filled the community hall one more time. Michael was there too, standing quietly in the back, folder in hand. He knew Gerald wouldn't go down without a fight. The room buzzed with murmurs until Gerald stormed in, shoulders squared, face flushed with anger. He slammed his old gavel onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You've all been lied to," he declared. His voice cracked, but the fire burned behind it. "Michael Anderson wants you to believe I stole land. He wants you to think I'm corrupt. But the truth is, he's the liar." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gerald held up a thick stack of papers. "I have proof that Michael manipulated the surveys, that he bribed a county clerk, that this entire case is built on fraud." Whispers turned to shouts. "Is that true?" "He wouldn't, would he?" Michael didn't move. He waited. Gerald waved the papers like a weapon. "And tonight, I'm exposing him for the fraud he is." The room crackled with tension. But then Michael stepped forward, calm as ever. He set his folder on the table beside Gerald's stack. "Open them," Michael said softly. "Let everyone see." Gerald froze. Michael flipped the first page from Gerald's pile. The proof was laughable. Grainy photocopies, forged signatures, sloppy cut and paste maps. Clearly fabricated. A neighbor shouted, "This is fake." Another yelled, "You lied again, Gerald." Michael opened his own folder. He laid out the originals, crisp, certified, county-sealed documents. The real surveys, the real deeds, the real emails. One by one, neighbors crowded forward to see. The evidence was undeniable. Michael's voice stayed steady. "I didn't forge anything. I didn't bribe anyone. The county confirmed this. The judge confirmed this. And tonight, I'll confirm it for all of you." He pointed to the survey map, bold lines cutting through Gerald's lot. "This is the truth. This is the land. And this," he gestured toward Gerald's home visible through the window, "is mine." The crowd erupted. Some gasped, others cheered. A few shook their heads in stunned silence. Gerald's face twisted with rage. He pounded the table, shouting over the noise, "You can't do this. This is my house, my land." Michael leaned in close, voice low but cutting. "It never was, and that was the breaking point." Gerald lunged across the table, fists clenched, veins bulging. Neighbors screamed as he tried to swing at Michael, but two men held him back, dragging him away as his shouts echoed through the hall. "You'll regret this, Michael. You'll all regret this." But the room wasn't on Gerald's side anymore. The once feared king of Maplewood was now a madman, exposed, powerless. The sheriff's deputies, waiting outside, stepped in and escorted Gerald out of the building. His final act of defiance had turned into a public humiliation. Silence hung in the air after he was gone. All eyes turned to Michael. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "This neighborhood deserves better. The HOA lied to you. Gerald lied to you. But the truth is here now, and it won't go away." The room erupted in applause. Not wild cheering, but steady, unified clapping. For the first time, Maplewood Estates stood together, not under Gerald's rule, but under the truth. That night marked the death of the old order. The HOA was officially dissolved. New committees were formed, neighbors actually voting for representatives instead of living under fear. And Gerald. He returned to his house, now just a shell of his former power. Every day he walked past his fence, staring at it like it mocked him. Because deep down, he knew the truth. The ground beneath his feet wasn't his anymore. It never had been. Michael had one. But as he stood on his porch watching the quiet street that evening, Michael felt something strange. Victory wasn't as simple as he imagined. Yes, he had exposed the corruption. Yes, he had claimed his land. But Maplewood Estates was scarred. Friendships broken. Trust shattered. And yet, in that quiet, he also sensed something else. There were still secrets in this neighborhood. Old deeds, buried agreements, forgotten lines waiting to be uncovered. The war with Gerald was over, but the battle for Maplewood Estates, perfect. Let's bring this saga to a cinematic close with Chapter 7. Resolution and aftermath approximately equals 800 words. This will wrap up the immediate drama, show the emotional fallout in Maplewood Estates, and leave a powerful hook for the next story in the series. Voice-over narration script Chapter 7. Resolution and aftermath approximately equals 800 words. The war for Maplewood Estates ended not with an explosion, but with silence. Weeks after the final showdown, the neighborhood felt different. Lawns still glistened with sprinklers, children still rode their bikes down the cul-de-sac, but the air carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The HOA was gone. The endless violation letters, the late-night harassment, the fear of fines, all of it swept away. For the first time in decades, neighbors could breathe, but freedom came with a cost. Gerald's house stood like a monument to defeat. Every time he stepped onto his porch, whispers followed. Once he had been the man who ruled the street. Now he was the man who lost it all. The king without a kingdom. Michael, meanwhile, didn't bask in his victory. He stayed quiet, tending his yard, repairing the damage left by months of battles. Some neighbors thanked him openly. Others avoided him, unsettled by the truth he had unearthed. Maplewood will never be the same. Sarah said one evening as they watched the sun dip behind Gerald's crooked fence, and she was right. The scandal had spread too far. Headlines still lingered online. Real estate agents whispered warnings to potential buyers. Maplewood Estates wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a cautionary tale. But beneath the surface, Michael sensed something even darker during the court filings. His attorney had uncovered references to other variance issues. Old developer notes hinted at more misdrawn boundaries, more unrecorded deeds. If Gerald's house was built on the wrong land, how many others were too? The thought gnawed at him. He had won the battle, but what if the war was bigger than he imagined? One night, a thin envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of another deed. This one showed overlapping boundaries across the neighborhood lake, land that dozens of homeowners believed belonged to the HOA. But in reality, it didn't. Michael stared at the page, his heart pounding. The ink was faded, the handwriting nearly illegible, but the meaning was clear. Gerald's house was only the beginning. Someone out there knew more. Someone wanted him to keep digging. And as Michael folded the paper back into the envelope, a chill ran down his spine. Because if the whispers were true, the next secret wasn't about a fence. It was about the lake. The very lake the entire neighborhood depended on. And when that truth came out, Maplewood Estates would face a war unlike anything it had ever seen before. But that is another story.